The Tennessee Volunteers travel to the Ohio State Buckeyes to play Saturday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And this is Saturday, December 21st. These are two teams that are 10-2. They each have a loss on the road to the top two teams in the country. Tennessee to Georgia, score of 31-17 on the road. No shame in losing in Sanford to the best head coach in college football in Kirby Smart. Ohio State losing 32-31 on the road in Oregon. No shame in losing to a top 5 head coach in Dan Lanning. And 4 time zones away to a team that has the best offense in the country. No shame in that at all, losing in Outson. But then, what really irritates these two fan bases and has irritated me while watching them is Tennessee lost to Arkansas. They lost to 6-6, slimy, grimy, poorly managed Arkansas. Seriously? Score was 19-14. Tennessee couldn't do anything against an Arkansas team that got depanted by LSU, Ole Miss, that lost to 3-9 Oklahoma State. Tennessee couldn't do anything against that team. Very strange, weird, out of the ordinary, just terrible, horrific loss. And for Ohio State, they lost to a 7-5 Michigan team. 13-10. Bad, horrific, confusing loss. The team looked disheveled the entire time, like Tennessee did against Arkansas. These are two teams that at times this year have looked like perhaps the best team in America, or one of. But then other times, it's like, what are you doing? How are you wasting the talent that you have put on your roster, that you have been blessed with? It's mind-boggling. But we're going to talk about these two teams because they're playing in the first round of the playoff, and one of them has to win. One has to win, one has to lose. And that all starts with the matchups here. And the matchup that might determine this game, but also may not. See, this matchup is the most interesting out of all of them. I think that Indiana-Notre Dame will be the best matchup, but this is the most fascinating. Like, Indiana-Notre Dame, I think, has the potential to be the best in terms of football quality and entertainment. This is the best from the standpoint of intrigue, from the X's and O's, from the coaching, from the response of the fan bases to a win or a loss here. How does Tennessee's rushing defense do against Ohio State's rushing offense? How does that work? Is that even a matchup that matters? Because maybe Ohio State does what many, including myself, think it should do when they just run an air raid and occasionally mix in the run so that Tennessee doesn't assign 8 people to defend the pass. What happens? Or does Ohio State maybe mix things up on the O-line? They find a formula for success. They try different blocking techniques, and they're able to run the ball here. Or maybe they do those things and Tennessee still kills them on the ground. That's what I'm anxious to see. And this also factors in terms of like pass rush, and can Ohio State block James Pierce Jr., which is something that, I would be very nervous about, to be frank. How does this look? Ohio State's offense at one point was top 5 in points per game. They're down to 35.5, 12th. They're down to 4th in points per play, 0.561. At one point, they were clearly number 1 in the country. They struggle in fourth quarter points per game, in first quarter points per game. They're very good in the bookends of halftime, second quarter and third quarter, but they're outside the top 40 in first quarter points per game and fourth quarter points per game, Ohio State is. And they only, they average 6.7 yards per play, the Buckeyes do, and they're averaging 5 yards per carry, which is 26th and on paper looks good, against Nebraska, against Michigan, against Oregon and Penn State. If you factor out the bigger runs against Oregon and Penn State, they can't run the football. It's the same thing against Indiana if you factor out Henderson's long run at the end when it was in garbage time. They're averaging 2 to 3 yards per carry. It's even sack adjusted. This rushing offense, ever since Josh Simmons went down, has been bad. And since McLaughlin's went down, it's been an atrocity. And be praying for Simmons, who's declared for the NFL, and also McLaughlin. Run the damn ball. as Seth McLaughlin says on his hat. But this Ohio State rushing game has been bad. Their passing game, on the other hand, they're averaging 8.9 yards per pass attempt, which is 8th. They have a 168 average team pass rating, which is 5th. And they're averaging 12.6 yards per completion. So their passing game is still really good. But they want to run the ball more than passing the football. Like they're averaging 53% run plays, 47% passing plays, and they can't run the football. So that's fascinating for the sole point of if Ohio State continues with their current identity, that plays right into Tennessee's hands, because Tennessee's not just better at running the football and offense, but when you look at their rushing defense, they're the exact same as OSU. Both of these teams are only allowing 2.9 opponent yards per carry. And Ohio State has the better sack percentage than Tennessee. So actually what that tells you is when you adjust for sacks, Tennessee is the better rushing defense than OSU does. Tennessee only allows 101.9 yards per game, 6.9 first downs per game. This is a Tennessee defense that is better at stopping the run than the pass. So Ohio State's strategy here should theoretically be pass the football a lot and run to keep them honest, but rely on your defense and Jeremiah Smith to get to them. But they have not been willing to do that. Against Penn State, against Oregon early, though against Oregon early before Simmons went down, the running game did have some success. Against Michigan for the entire game, against Indiana for much of the game, they refused to go to a pass-heavy set, a formation, a play style, even though it's been working and everyone who watches the TV sees that it works. And they just... Ohio State's offensive staff this year, and we'll talk about this as the show goes on, has been one of the best in America at shooting themselves in the foot. It's unbelievable. So this is an intriguing matchup, not just in that context, but in general too, because let's say Ohio State does go pass heavy, but they run the ball to keep Tennessee honest or to maybe catch them by surprise. That's still important. If Ohio State succeeds at running the ball by reducing the carries and you have addition by subtraction and they succeed on Tennessee, well, Tennessee's defense is going to have a hard time defending against that and also the pass attack of OSU. But if they succeed, regardless of OSU's game plan, that's going to make it a lot easier for a shaky Tennessee secondary to defend elite athletes that Ohio State has in Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, and also OSU's running backs out of the backfield, and Will Howard, who's been a pretty good quarterback. Next up for another matchup is Tennessee's pass rush, their passing defense, against Ohio State's passing offense. I think that Tennessee, if they're going to win this game, is going to have to make this slow. They're going to have to make it low score. They're going to have to bog OSU down. If this becomes a shootout, unless Nico Imaliava plays a game that I have not seen him play all season long, Tennessee will not win. And you never want to count on one of your players playing a game that he has not played all season. And if Tennessee does play that game, let's say they win in a shootout, well, they're not going to have that performance again, likely, and therefore they'll have to play a different game. They'll have to force their opponents to play uglier games in the future if they want to win in the playoff. Their defense it's really good, Tennessee's is. So that's also why I'm taking this angle, is because they can bog OSU down. I don't expect Ohio State to score in the 40s here, regardless of what happens. And I would say high 30s is probably the peak. 20s, lower 30s is probably what you should expect from OSU in this game. For Tennessee, you probably expect, low mid 20s here. Power ratings say OSU should win, not by that much. We'll get to that in a bit. But that's kind of the angle I'm taking here. Both of these teams can hold each other to the teens. There's even a world, I think, where these teams can hold each other to single digits. Ask me why. Michigan held OSU to 10 points for a whole game, and Tennessee was held to 0 points in the first half against Alabama. They also held Alabama to 7 points in the first half. So those are some things to consider. You look at Tennessee's defense here. You got the legendary James Pierce Jr., Bryson Eason, Omar Norman-Lott, Amari Thomas, and Dominic Bailey on the D-line. You have Jeremiah Tillander, Arian Carter at linebacker. And at secondary, Jermon McCoy, Andre Turrentine, Will Brooks, Ricky Gibson III, and Christian Harrison. For Ohio State's offense, you have wide receiver Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, Emeka Egbuka, and Brandon Innes as your main guys. On the O-line, Donovan Jackson, Carson Hinsman, Austin Sierreveld, Tegra Shabola, and Josh Fryer. And they may try to mix in Luke Montgomery or Josh Padilla, George Fitzpatrick, anyone they can. It sounds like from what Day has said, they do want to mix up on the offensive line. That's because this right now is one of the worst, if not perhaps the worst offensive line in the 12-team college football playoff. Based off of what I saw against Indiana, what I saw against Michigan, what I've seen against Nebraska, for example. And Tennessee's D-line is mean. It's one of the better D-lines in all of football, one of the better D-lines in the playoffs. Is the best? I don't know. I would straight up venture to say maybe not, but it's close. It can contend for being the best. And James Pierce Jr. no doubt is one of the better players on defense in the college football playoff. You look at Tennessee's pass rush, and while their sack percentage is not number one, it's still top 30. It's 7.91 sack percentage, and they average 2.5 sacks per game. Very impressive numbers right there. They only allow 6.1 yards per pass attempt, which is 15th, and 10.7 yards per completion, which is 24th. It's not quite the same as OSU's. OSU is a 10.51 sack percentage. Ohio State only allows 5.8 yards per pass attempt and 9.7 yards per completion. And something that's fascinating is when you look at the pass rush on the other side, OSU only allows a 3.37 quarterback sack percentage, which is 18th. Now, it's obviously worse than that because of the injuries, and it's being propped up by stats in the prior year. Tennessee has a quarterback sack percentage allowed of a 7.45, which is 91st, and OSU is second in sack percentage from their defense. That's a massive mismatch in favor of OSU. OSU's pass rush, their blitzes versus Tennessee's offensive line and protecting Nico. But it can be the same thing in favor of Tennessee. And Tennessee can get pressure with 4 because they have James Pierce Jr. Ohio State has struggled all season long to get pressure with 4. Before the Indiana game, and I imagine it's the same now because they didn't get any sacks on Michigan, Ohio State has struggled to get pressure with 4. In fact, only about 50% of their sacks on the season came from the defensive line, if not less. That's an atrocious ratio. They need their linebackers and safeties to get pressure, and that's a liability against better teams. It just is. That's how it works, because that means there's less guys in coverage, more opportunities for opponents' receivers to make plays if they are schemed properly. Ohio State's passing offense, speaking of scheme, when Chip Kelly calls passing plays, when they scheme properly, when they use their talent, it's very effective. They are 4th in completion percentage, averaging a 70.35% completion percentage. They average 8.9 yards per pass attempt. They average a 168 passer rating. Again, they average through the air, or just overall, 6.7 yards per play, 423.6 yards per game. Part of the reason Ohio State is so successful, though, at throwing is they only average 28.7 pass attempts per game, which is 87th. Tennessee, though, averages 27.1, even fewer attempts per game, and they only complete 63% of their throws. I mean, QB play for Tennessee has been quite the struggle this season. OSU, what you want is you want the secondary matchup to be the critical matchup, and you want to pass heavy, mix in the run to stay honest, and have your defense play at the level it has all season long. If you're Tennessee, you want the matchup to be the former, but maybe it won't. If it is, you'll probably have automatic success because Ohio State's offensive line is bad, straight up bad. Some people have talked about, like, if they change the technique or if they mix it up, it'll be so much better and we'll be able to run the ball successfully again. You might be better, but this team for the rest of the year, I will tell you right now, probably will not have success running the ball as their main course of action. You'll want to pass to open up the run if you're OSU, not the other way around. But if you're Tennessee and you get stuck with this matchup, a matchup that might be more likely, but maybe it won't. What you want to do is get pressure on Will Howard. You want to give Chip Kelly a numbers advantage in the box so that he tries to run the ball, because Chip Kelly's offense, a lot of it's about numbers edge. So if you can stop the run with 4, only send 4. Dare Ohio State to run and make it easier on your DBs and linebackers to defend the pass. When I look at these offenses, I like Tennessee at tight end, center, and guard more than OSU. And Ohio State's center and guard play has been pretty mediocre, if not bad, right now. Tight end play is pretty similar. But I like Ohio State a lot more at quarterback, wide receiver, and while I think Ohio State at tackle is a bit suspect, I think Tennessee's pretty bad at tackle. So I actually give Ohio State something on the offensive line over Tennessee, the tackle position. Quarterback, Will Howard's been much better than Nico this year. And Ohio State's wide receivers have been elite. Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, Brandon Inniss, Carnell Tate. Tennessee, they got Brew McCoy, Chris Brazzell II, Squirrel White, and Dante Thornton at wide receiver. Not the same caliber. Other offensive players are Lance Hurd, Andrej Karic, Cooper Mays, Javonte Spraggins, John Campbell Jr. at O-line, Miles Kitzelman, Holden Stays at tight end, Nico Imaliava at QB, Cole Harrison at fullback, and Dylan Sampson at running back. Sampson is ridiculously good. The only reason I make it a push at running back is I think OSU's way deeper. Judkins and Henderson are... I'm not going to call them elite running backs anymore, because I think elite running backs, like let's say a Caleb Johnson, would do more with this offensive line and with these weapons than they have. But they're great near elite running backs, and having 2 of them in the same room, that is huge. Tennessee has one running back who I think is better than both of these right now, at least in terms of explosivity, but Dylan Sampson does have a fumble problem. Dylan Sampson has over 20 rushing touchdowns. A large part of the secret to Tennessee's success is not their yards per carry, where they only average 5, which is 29th. It's rather the fact they run for some of the most out of all teams in the nation. 60% of their plays, 60.78% to be specific, are rushing plays. And they run the ball for about 45.4 attempts per game, which is 5th. They punish you. They wear you down. And Dylan Sampson does not get tired. And their defense makes it so that they can lean on the ground, and they have enough talent on the perimeter to make you pay if you were too aggressive in stopping the run. So both of these offenses have a bit of dysfunction. They also have a lot of talent. I like Tennessee more on the O-line, tight end. Running back's a push, but if I had to lean one way right now, it honestly would probably be Tennessee. But maybe it's OSU. I prefer OSU's depth, honestly. In fact, yeah, I'd lean OSU at running back if I had to right now. I prefer their depth. I just think that their O-line really holds them back. A quarterback, wide receiver, and offensive tackle, I'd go to OSU. I think that defensively, Tennessee's better at corner. Ohio State's corners this year have been carried, I think, in large part by every other position group, scheme, the best safety room in the country that resides at Ohio State, a linebacker room that's top 10, if not top 5, could be the best in the nation, and a D tackle room that I think is pretty good. D end is a push. I prefer OSU's depth, but James Pierce Jr. is a much better defensive end than JT Tuimoloau or Jack Sawyer. I would take the X-Factor player there. So I'd personally prefer Tennessee's defensive end room compared to Ohio State's right now. Corner, I don't think it's much of a question. Safety is also not much of a question. Safety is probably the greatest disparity here on this list. Ohio State has Lathan Ransom, Caleb Downs, Jordan Hancock. Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs are the best safety duo in the country. Add in Jordan Hancock, who's a nickelback, which is typically like kind of referred to as a safety position. That's the 3 best starting safeties in any 4-2-5 defense in college football right now. And I like D tackle for OSU. Linebacker, I love Cody Simon's been an awesome player this year. But Tennessee, I mean, I think Omar Norman Lott up front is really, really good. I think that Bryson Eason, Omari Thomas, they have a good D tackle room. Might be deeper than OSU's. Might. There's debate there. And James Pierce Jr. has been a weapon up front. Huge mismatch. That's something Ohio State's going to have to pay attention to. Abdul Carter, it took him a quarter or two to figure out OSU's defense, but eventually he began working Donovan Jackson. Will that happen with James Pierce Jr. and if he's matched up with Donovan Jackson or Josh Fryer? We'll have to see. I think that let's look at Ohio State's defense because I didn't mention them, and then we'll get to the other things. You have Jack Sawyer, Ty Hamilton, Tyleik Williams, GT Tuimoloau on D-line, Cody Simon, Sonny Styles at linebacker, and Denzel Burke, Lathan Ransom, Caleb Downs, Davison Igbinosun, and Jordan Hancock in the secondary. By the way, if you look at Ohio State's corner room, and again, I'm not a coach, so I don't want to be too critical here. Look at Jermaine Matthews Jr. Look at him to replace Davison Igbinosun or Denzel Burke. I doubt it happens, but I think maybe it should happen because Jermaine Matthews Jr., I think, is a potential future All-American. Burke has struggled this year, and Igbinosun just can't help himself but commit PI. He can't. And I don't know if that's a coaching thing or if that's just who he is, but it's kind of sad, honestly. Other important things to pay attention to, I think Tennessee is better on the lines of scrimmage if I had to choose a side, but I'm leaving it as a push because there is a chance that OSU is better. I think OSU's played the tougher strength of schedule. Tennessee per metrics has, but I think that Oregon and Penn State and Indiana is a better high-level group of teams to play than Alabama and Georgia. That's just my thought process right there. Like the best teams on your strength of schedule matter exponentially more than the smaller teams do. They should not be counted equally in strength of schedule. And I think, I don't know if this is exactly what College Football Nerds said, but they use that as part of the logic behind why Georgia lost some games this year that were uncharacteristic, and I don't disagree with that at all. Like, if they have a really tough schedule, or that's not the logic. If they have a really easy schedule and their only tough game is at Ole Miss, they might beat Ole Miss on the road or at least play them closer because they're more rested, they're not as battered, not so many opponents to focus on, for example. I think that special teams goes Tennessee's way. Ohio State's special teams unit outside of Caleb Downs when he returns punts has been pretty bad. Ohio State's better in terms of the blue chip ratio. They're the more talented roster in terms of recruiting. And I think their roster in terms of what I've watched this year is better. They are more functional overall on defense and passing offense. Tennessee is better at running the football. And a huge part of the third reason is because Ohio State's banged up, which is not a total excuse. They've poorly developed on the O-line. I don't think it's a coincidence that Simmons and Seth McLaughlin were both incoming transfers. I don't think that's much of a coincidence. They haven't developed, let me rephrase it. They haven't developed horribly, but their development's been very hit and miss, and they haven't recruited well. And outside of the two incoming transfers, it feels like they've developed pretty terribly. So make from that what you will, but at every other position, they've developed either above average or average to elite. So I like Ohio State's roster. I mean, I still think it's loaded. It's one of the better rosters in the country. They just have some critical weaknesses. They're mortal. You look at what the power ratings say and who they favor. Per FPI, Ohio State's favored by 7. Per S&P Plus, they're favored by 6.1. Per My Potential Power Index, Ohio State's favored to win this game by 15. And I think this kind of pans out here. I mean, Tennessee is not as good analytically. The power ratings will tell you that. You look at points per play margin, for example. Tennessee is 0.239 points per play margin, a 0.21 expected points added margin. Ohio State, meanwhile, is a 0.383 points per play margin, which means for every one of their plays compared to every one of their opponent's plays on an average basis, they score 0.383 more points, which is second. And they have an expected points added margin of 0.281. Tennessee got dominated by Georgia at the end of the day. Ohio State only lost to Oregon by a point. Michigan is a better team than Arkansas in terms of talent, in terms of power ratings. And there's also the fact that Tennessee has struggled in a variety of other games, almost losing to Florida. Yikes. Vanderbilt got on them early. Now, Tennessee, to their credit, won that game. I don't really hold that against them. But there's also the fact that the majority of their dominant performances came against Chattanooga, They came against Kent State, and they came against NC State, all pretty bad teams. Ohio State has, dominated Indiana. They dominated bad teams like Northwestern, Purdue, dominated a good team in Iowa, for example. They survived Nebraska. They controlled Penn State for much of that game in the same way that Oregon controlled Penn State for much of that game, where Penn State could have won. It wasn't a blowout. It wasn't never in doubt, but Ohio State was just one step ahead, seemingly all the time. I think Ohio State's been the more impressive team. They've done a better job of scoring and preventing their opponents from scoring. You look at the strength of schedules per ESPN, they're pretty equal. Tennessee 28, Ohio State 29. Tennessee is 9th in game control, 8th in efficiency, and the Buckeyes are 5th in game control, 3rd in efficiency. You see some of that up and downness in that game control where these teams have had a lot of dominant performances, but they have had some performances that just make you have an eyesore, that give you a black eye, like the Arkansas and Michigan games for the Volunteers and Buckeyes respectively. And then they had some of their vulnerabilities exploited in the Georgia game for Tennessee and the Oregon game for Ohio State. I think that Tennessee's better at strength and conditioning right now. I've been very critical of Ohio State's strength and conditioning program for years. I think going back to 2022, definitely last year, large part of this year, it's been very evident they do not know how to develop, especially along the lines of scrimmage. Got it at wide receiver, got it at quarterback. I think Will Howard's progression from Kansas State to Ohio State's been very clear that he's developed into a better QB. He's just not elite, which you're not going to get an elite quarterback every year. Like Nick Saban didn't. Kirby Smart hasn't. Even Lincoln Riley hasn't. So they do a good job at developing at all things except for the lines of scrimmage. And I think Tennessee has done a better job there and a better job overall given their talent. I think they're better conditioned and more physical. I do think Ohio State, though, is the better head coach. I think Day is better than Heupel. I think that Jim Knowles is better than Tim Banks, same with his assistants. An area that's a push for me, is the offensive staff. I question which offensive staff is better. On one hand, analytics say OSU's offense is clearly better, but I also know that Ohio State's a lot more talented and balanced on offense than Tennessee is. And Chip Kelly's called some pretty atrocious games this year. Granted, so has Tennessee, but that's an area where I wonder if this game maybe tells us who has the better offensive staff, in the sense that maybe the school with the better offensive staff is the one that wins this game. Regardless of all of that, factoring all of that in, I'm picking Ohio State to win, and I'm picking them to cover. I think that Ohio State right now is just as good as Georgia is right now. There is a coaching difference. I think Georgia is better coaching-wise, but I think that with it being in the shoe, and with Ohio State having better talent at DB everywhere across the board, wide receiver across the board, having the better QB, having the better linebackers, a D-line that, while I would lean Tennessee if I had to, I think it's pretty close. And that with the home field advantage. It could also be a home field disadvantage for Ohio State. People have talked about that, and I don't think it's overstated. The crowd could work against OSU, but ultimately it's still going to work against Tennessee, because when Ohio State's defense is on the field, that place is going to get loud, and the fans are going to get restless. And the defense does its job. There's not much to boo about in regards to the defense. So I do think Ohio State covers here, and I think they win 31-17. I could be wrong. This game's much harder to read than Penn State SMU or Texas versus Clemson. And it might be harder to read than Indiana versus Notre Dame as well, because there isn't a lot to cross-reference here between the teams that Ohio State has played and the teams that Tennessee has played. I'm picking Ohio State to win, picking them to win by double digits, 31-17. Wouldn't be shocked if Tennessee maybe wins in like a 20-13 game. Actually, I wouldn't be shell-shocked, but I'd be a little bit surprised if Tennessee won in that style of game. And it would be a huge negative for not just the Big Ten, but also for Ryan Day. That would be quite the gut punch to end the season. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also hit that notification bell so that way you can get notified when new content from College Football with Sam drops. I appreciate you very much, and also share the video around to others who you know enjoy the sport of college football and love it as I do and as you do, and comment your thoughts down below so that we can have a conversation, because I want to know what you are thinking. And join our Discord server where we talk college football 24/7 via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Thank you to my Heisman Patreon members, Crash2488, Brascal Rascal, and Kylo OH. Thank you to my All-American Patreon members, Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye. And thank you to my All-Conference members, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus. Make sure to check out my merchandise store and or Patreon page, or super chat down in the comment section below to support the channel. The Patreon page and merchandise store links are in the description or down below in the pinned comment. I hope you have a wonderful day. It is December, so Merry Christmas and also Happy New Year. I will see you guys soon.